Hello everybody, welcome to Epoch 245. Today I'd like to go over some new features that I'm working on or thinking about working on and get your guys' feedback on them, whether or not it's worth spending my time on it. And so let's get into it. Let's see, what are we doing? So first off, I made this little GIF that kind of shows the growth from back at the end of last year. I think it's December 21st, missed an epoch, and then every epoch since then we've been doing this. You can start to see a little bit of growth outwards, but what would be really cool is, right, if people start to use this tool and start to open up relays in these other regions, right? So let's go back to the actual live view of the tool. We can see, check out these relays. And I don't think there's really any major feature differences. So of course, you can see the individual relays still, right? You can click on them and see what's going on. That's still the same. You can see the stake density, the stake density being the amount of ADA in each region versus the border, which is the number of relays in that region. And let's go to the total stake. And these are actually, I think, my favorite views now because they look a little bit wonky, but it's quite good for understanding what's going on at the macro level in the network, right? But probably the thing that I want to spend the most time on is actually, this is just a screenshot. I have this idea that I was talking about on a few different podcasts this week, is like how to make this information more usable for people to stake with. And so there's actually this idea that I want to look at with you guys of a Voronoi cell, a Voronoi diagram, which is this pretty simple idea that if you have a plane, it can actually be a three-dimensional space as well, but a two-dimensional space works for our purposes. I'll actually use one with color. I'll use one with unique colors. If we are looking at, let's open this in a new tab. So we're looking at this guy, right? Each black dot is a point in a two-dimensional plane, and basically you assign it a cell or a region, an area of space, where the area of space that is colored for it is the area that is closest to it, right? So that you can maybe easily see this in this gray, dark green, light green area where these 3 points are kind of contesting some kind of area. And you can see that this kind of border between where all three are touching is kind of this average point between this point, this point, this point. And then there's a straight line, which is perpendicular to the line between these two. And the same thing here, down here. If you were to draw a line here, this line would be perpendicular to that. And same thing for here, right? And basically all these, there's a, if you draw to, it's kind of like nearest neighbors and draw this perpendicular line to the midpoint, you can kind of subdivide space. So if we go over and see like what would that look like on this thing, you know, let's draw some, let's use a light blue. Let's draw some perpendicular lines, or not perpendicular, some straight lines between some of the nearest cells over here, right? This is not going to be super accurate because whatever. And then let's see, a few more. So these light blue lines we're saying are straight lines, don't laugh, between, I think this is Sao Paulo. So it looks like a big part of Brazil, and all these other kind of areas. And then we draw a, let's say, green line, which is perpendicular to, first let's draw actually the midpoints of all these lines. So we'll take a big dot. Say that's the midpoint of this line, midpoint, 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 right? And then lastly, let's take, let's say yellow, smaller, and kind of draw a line perpendicular to it at that midpoint kind of. And we don't have, these don't have to be super long. They kind of have to be long enough to kind of intersect with the neighbor, right? And again, these are very rough, not exact. Sounds like my son is at the door. So what this is kind of saying is that because this guy is kind of out here separate from everyone else, he actually, or they actually have a lot of resulting territory that belongs to it, right? This would all be this guy's space. And what I'm thinking is that if this kind of visualization were here on the at the map level, you know, people would see these relays which are separate from the rest of, not separate, in unique locations, and are adding a lot of like geographical value to the Cardano network because they're closer to, or they're serving a larger region of people in terms of proximity and having something out there. And also, of course, my favorite thing, disaster resilience and whatnot. Whereas another relay in Frankfurt is not going to do anything. So what I'm thinking is a lot of these are kind of resolving to the same data center. There might be some kind of clustering of latitude, longitude, so that everyone in Sao Paulo is kind of grouped together. And if there's maybe 10 relays here, we would take, let's say, however many, if this is some number of square kilometers, divided by the number of relays in this cell, right? So I think I would apply some kind of clustering, because the relays that are like 384 relays in Frankfurt, they're going to own a very tiny region of Central Europe. And maybe, if we were just to highlight some kind of critical things out here, I'd say like these guys in Western Africa, Southern Africa, a little bit in India, whoever this is over in Mongolia or China, Russia, somewhere over there. Probably some of these things in the Caucasus, especially if Atala Prism and that stuff is going live in Georgia. These guys are probably going to be pretty important. Some parts of Upper Canada, Mexico, and these places. These are some pretty unique relay locations. Kiwi land. I don't think there's anyone over in Hawaii, right? And so probably one thing I'll also add into that is this idea that you can only own territory that is inland, because otherwise, relays that are located close to the ocean would by default grab a big chunk of ocean water, which is not really, by definition, almost doesn't really have a large population there. I don't know if that's oceanist, but I don't think it is. And maybe even you could imagine another thing that could happen is that, what do you call it? You might even start to overlay some other kinds of data, like census data and what have you. And you could even try to kind of assign how many people are in a certain region. So you would take first the geographic area that belongs to a relay, and then you'd add back in, the number of people, or account for the number of people that live there, so that, right, we are making sure that we're not just rewarding you for, I think the Gobi Desert is over here, for putting a relay out there, you get some amount of points, but for putting relays in places with larger populations, that is like more to be incentivized, right? So that's kind of what I'm thinking there. I was also kind of thinking, actually in my day job, what I do is build some kind of like AI classification and different regression models, and I was thinking about making a very simple interface for a series of questions that asks what the user wants to do. Do they want to focus on rewarding pools with good pledge ratios, right, low leverage, or do they want to focus on pools that have infrastructure out there, or what? And then maybe making a ranked ordered recommendation, right, based on those kind of factors. So I think I'm starting to think about, this is some interesting data that we're looking at, but it's kind of unconsumable, and so to that extent, maybe it doesn't even matter that it exists, and I'd like to make it matter that it exists. So If you have any ideas or questions about like what is important to you and what you would like to know about a stake pool in terms of different factors that influence you in your staking decision, and how do you best account for all those things, then leave a comment below, and I'll try to figure out a way to make this better incorporate that. Okay, thank you. Have a good night.